going to go through the idea of a digital vision and what that means. So I'm going to break that up into some manageable parts. So we're going to start off by looking at what is a digital vision? Why do we need one? Where's the best place to start? What does it need to do? And some suggestions as to how to go about creating a digital vision, and then what to do after you've created that digital vision. How do you go about implementing it? And then we'll just finish off with some conclusions, recommendations, and any questions and sort of any other thoughts anyone's got. So we move on. So we'll start with, well, what is a digital vision? And so if we break that up into its two parts, what's digital, what's vision? We'll start with digital. So that's probably most people will know, but just to reiterate, digital really is about electronic technology that uses zeros and ones to generate, store, and process data. And that storage and processing data, that's the two key parts there. Digitization, type of digital, is digitization is the process of converting analog information into a digital form. So I think they're all pretty clear-cut things there. So looking at digital vision, it may be at its simplest form that we're just migrating, we're just taking what we've already got and a like-for-like move from, say, some paper forms to a digital form of those forms. So it could be application forms, or it could be that you're offering customers a different way of receiving information. So rather than sending out a paper document, they get a digital form of that. Now, those approaches save money. They're very quick to implement, easier for the customer, but they do miss the true value of what digital can bring. The key with that is that the value is delivered by that data access. And a good example of that is analog data. If it's just stored in a filing cabinet, it's of no use to anybody, maybe apart from the auditors. With digital data, it can be searched, it can be analyzed, manipulated by digital services, and therefore its value to the organization can be multiplied. So if you take the approach of a digital vision just being about migrating what you've already got to a digital version of that, you're not really getting the benefits of that approach. It's only when you look at it in terms of a transformation rather than a migration that those true benefits can be realized. So what's a transformation look like? A couple of interesting definitions of it. A digital transformation means changing working methods. It means being more agile, putting users first, starting small and iterating. And that's from the UK government of all places. Another good example of it is the integration of digital technology into areas of a business, fundamentally changing how you operate and deliver value. So it's about those digital data driving those digital services, and these act as the multiplier for the firm to be able to increase its impact and its value. So we've talked about digital. What about a vision? What's a vision? It's the ability to think about, plan the future with imagination or wisdom, a mental image of what the future will or could be like. There's some pretty powerful concepts there, and I think it gives us some good direction as to how to go about defining a digital vision as well, which we'll come on to shortly. So bringing those two things together then, digital and vision, what might a digital vision look like? Now, there's lots of definitions out there if you Google it. This is one that I've sort of put together as I've been putting this presentation together, and I hope that it distills down the key aspects of what we might want to achieve with a digital vision. So with imagination and wisdom, create an image of what your organization will look like in the future via a digital transformation. This is not a migration. It's a vision that fundamentally changes how you operate, empowering your organization to multiply its value. So hopefully that distills down the key aspects of what we want to try and achieve with that. So why do we need a digital vision? What's the drivers there? All organizations always need to be changing and evolving. There's always pressures on that business, whether that's market drivers and competition always changing and evolving. Customer expectations are always growing. The need for more transparency, which ironically is users of digital services and other parts of your life tend to drive that desire. There's always increasing regulatory requirements. There's always that need to add to your value proposition as an organization and to be able to scale your business, whether that's in terms of size, growth, profit, whatever's important to you. And digital can play a part in that. So where would you start with all of this? The best place to start is the organization. And when I say the organization, I mean reaffirming and challenging your understanding of what that organization is all about. And the reason for that is that when you come to create a digital vision, you want to be validating that digital vision back against what's important to that organization. So you need to know what's important for that organization. So what's its reason for existing? What's its business model? What's your scope? What's your unique selling point? What's that secret sauce that makes your organization that much more special and better than any other organization? What's your vision, your aims, your brand? Is it focused? What are your strategic and commercial goals? Can you define your organization's what it uniquely delivers in one sentence? If you can do that, that makes defining things like a digital vision that much easier when it comes to validate them. And I've got some examples of that sort of coming up. So how would you go about reaffirming your organization's purpose? Let's assume that you're not clear as to what it's doing. Engagement's the key piece there. And it's always worth starting with the customers. They always should come first to the organization. And when it comes to engagement, they should be the first place to start. So who are your customers at the moment? And are they going to be the same customers you want to be targeting in the future? And why is that? What's the opportunity that you're seeing as an organization? What do these customers want, both now and in the future? Gathering feedback from them, either via the teams that are customer facing. So it might be your customer services team, your investment managers. They'll have a pretty good idea, the finger on the pulse as to what's going on. You might want to send out surveys. You might want to use your analytics that most of your systems will have. Get a better understanding of that if you've not already got it. Understand what the demographics are. So you're not just talking about an amorphous mass of customers, but looking at the individual needs of each of those areas. Maybe even divide them up into personas as a useful tool to use. The next one to look at is to engage with your internal stakeholders, the organization itself, and identify who your key stakeholders are, who your decision makers are. What would their contribution be to defining and understanding and reaffirming that your organization's purpose? What are their expectations and requirements? Looking at the market, talking to market leaders. What's the direction of the market? Where's it heading? What are the drivers? And it feels like at the moment there's so many different drivers going on. I'm sure it's always been the case, but it just feels as though there's a lot of stuff coming in at the moment. Things like demographic change, which we'll cover off in a bit more detail in a minute. You've got things like climate change, drivers like open wealth, crypto, those sort of key catchphrases, and the bigger picture stuff. The rise of China, authoritarianism, trade barriers, things like going on the Red Sea and the Panama Canal at the moment. All of those things can have an impact on your ability to generate wealth for your customers and your organization, and where those opportunities may lie and where those challenges may lie as well. What regulatory requirements that might come through as a result of those things. And then finally, looking at your suppliers. What trends are they seeing in the market that could help to define and drive your business forward? What are the new technologies that might support your business? And that could be quite useful when we come to look at the digital vision as well. What role they have with you and in the future. So we talked about a number of different engagement areas there, pressures and challenges and things that are going to define your business and drive your business. There's one of those areas that I just want to touch on very briefly as an example of the scale of things that are coming down the line, and that is a demographic challenge. And I think probably most of us here have had this come across their desks at some point, the great wealth transfer, I think is what it's been described as. And just wanted to put a bit of context around it and then drivers for it. So back in 1947 was when the UK birth rate peaked and the so-called start of the baby boomer generation. If you then project forward, the life expectancy of those people is around about 80 years, which means between now and 2027 approximately, there's going to be a huge wealth transfer going on as those people unfortunately pass away. That transfer is going to increase between now and 2027, drop off over that, and then there'll be a smaller increase during the 2030s and into the 2040s, but nowhere near as big as what's happening in the next 3 and 4 years. And what that's going to do is drive huge changes in the industry. At the moment, it's very male dominated, tends to be an older investor as the key sort of demographics. That's going to change to being more female and being younger. And they're going to have a different set of demands, a different set of challenges. And that provides some huge opportunities to organizations, but it also provides some huge risks as well that need to be mitigated. And so those are the sort of one example of all of the different pressures that are coming to bear on organizations. So in summary, looking at the organization, you want to ask the question, is it still fit for purpose? Have you got a clear idea of what success looks like? If you can refine that down into a single statement, then that becomes much easier to challenge and understand what's going to be important to your business going forward. And a good example of what I've seen of how to distill that down into a single statement was actually a book I read a while back. It's not a business book. It was actually a book written by a couple of rowers, Ben Hunt Davis and Harriet Beveridge. It was about the men's rowing 8 from the 2000 Olympics. And they were having all sorts of troubles going into the Olympics. They were supposed to be one of the favourites and they just weren't performing. They were having real struggles, lots of advice being thrown in their direction, and they weren't quite sure how to deal with it all. And so what they decided to do was just to pare everything back to sort of follow those KISS principles. And so they really wanted to very clearly define what success looked like for them as an organization. And so they tried to distill that down into one statement, and then everything would be validated against that. And that one goal that they came up with as their organization was that they wanted to win gold by basically being the fastest boat. And so what they then did was come up with a statement that they would then measure everything against. If somebody came to them and said, right, we've got a new idea for a new dietary approach or a new training approach, or we're going to get you out and do some more, more media events, they would always ask a simple question with any of those ideas: but will it make the boat go faster? And if it doesn't, they won't do it. Just refined it right down to that clear statement. And if you can find an equivalent simple statement for your organization that brings that to life, then it's much easier to do things like this digital vision stuff. So moving on to that. Digital vision, what does it need to do? I think it needs to do 4 things. First of all, it needs to inspire. It needs to have an inspiring vision that people can connect with and be willing to get on board and get behind. It needs to align with your strategic and commercial goals. That is, does it make your boat go faster? And it needs to have buy-in, and probably the most important point, it needs to have ownership. If you can get ownership, getting this implemented from the top down, then it's much more likely to get done. More importantly, if you can create a situation where there's people at the top of your organization feel as though it's their idea, then it's even more likely to get done. And I think the key point and the last point is it needs to be implemented. It's all very well coming out with a digital vision, but if it doesn't actually get implemented, then it's all been all for nothing. So digital vision, how might we go about doing this? There's a couple of suggestions that I'm going to put forward here, and they are just suggestions. There's many ways of doing these things. Before we do that, let's just do a quick recap. What is a digital vision? What is it we're trying to implement? So just as a recap, with imagination and wisdom, create an image of what your organization could look like in the future via a digital transformation. It's not a migration, it's a vision that fundamentally changes how you operate, empowering your organization to multiply its value. So where do we start? How do we create that image of an organization that's so important? Well, as it says in the description, we can use imagination and we can use wisdom. So let's start with imagination. How might we do that? So I'm thinking, why not take inspiration from movies and gaming? They're the industries that do these things best. And the key tools that they use is they create a story. They create storyboards at the back of that to make it more visual. And then they'll role play it, reading through the scripts, all that sort of thing. I know that probably sounds a bit crazy, and probably people thinking, well, I know people in the industry, if you tried that with them in our organization, they'd probably run for the hills. But I'm sure there's probably a few aspiring Laurence Oliviers in there as well, who are keen to dust off the version of Henry V. Now, the reason for suggesting this is actually an approach that the software industry takes. So when we sit down with a customer to understand what their requirements are with a piece of software, we'll sit down and try and gather their requirements. And the way that they'll be created is actually turned into a set of stories. And in this case, it would be, talking about software, it would be a user story or a use case. And that's really describing an interaction between a user of a system and the system itself, or it could be between systems or even between individuals. But you write that down as an interaction between the two parties. The way to bring that to make it visual is to use, in the case of software, is using wireframes. So what you're not doing is describing the solution. You're just helping to represent the problem statement in a more visual format. And then you'd role play it. We'd sit down with the customer and we'd walk back through those user stories and make sure that we've understood those requirements. And then when we come to bring that to the development team, we'll do the same thing. We'll walk through and role play it. And then again, when we come to walk it through with the QA team, that's how they will validate and test that system. So by looking at a digital vision, creating it using this approach, You've already got a set of requirements ready to go out to market and see if anybody can satisfy those. The other key bit of advice at this point is to iterate. You're never going to get it right first time. So iterate, try again, go through the stories, role play them, see where they don't work, make some changes and go back around again. And it's the same really for the vision itself. It's all very well to create a digital vision, but if it just gets put on the shelf and never gets reviewed again, it's going to get out of date. So it's important to review that and iterate back around that, every couple of years or every year, if possible. So we talked about imagination. How do we bring wisdom to the plate? So the ability or the results of an ability to think or act and utilizing knowledge, experience, understanding, common sense, and insight. That's one definition of what wisdom is. So how do we put these things into effect? It's going back to really what we talked about earlier when we talked about the business, the organization. It's about engagement. Engage with your customers, internal key stakeholders, your market leaders, your suppliers. Apply their knowledge, your knowledge and experience, understanding, bit of common sense and insight. Bring all those things together to gather those ideas. When you're going through that, it's important to be objective. It's easy to be subjective, harder to be objective, but use the data, look at the data, yours and others, and let that drive it. Digital if possible, and a good example of where digital can play a part. The other key piece of advice is don't go looking for a solution and then try and find the problem you're trying to solve. Always be the other way around. Let the problem drive the solution. Identify your problem and then look for a solution on it. And we'll cover off in a bit more detail in a minute as to why that's so important. The other the key thing to do is whatever vision you come up with, whatever stories, etc., you come up with, make sure you then validate them. And that's where it's important to be able to validate them back against the needs of the organization. So what are the problems in the business that need tackling? Does the digital approach provide the solution you need? It may not always be a digital solution that's best. It may be that it's an analog solution. It's a face-to-face. It's a old-fashioned way of doing it, if you will. But that may be the best approach. Try and be objective and not subjective, as we said before. And avoid what I call the magpie syndrome, that love of shiny toys. Now, that's particularly easy to happen if you're being presented by suppliers with some very advanced, very sexy software. You can very easily get dragged in and think, oh, we absolutely need that as a business. But always ask that key question. Does it support our needs? Does it support our strategic goals? Does it support our commercial goals? And as I said before, if you've got a very simple statement that you can use as a validation point for that, then all the easier. So as I said before, does it make your boat go faster? If it doesn't, don't do it. It's the point at which to use some of that common sense. So you've done your digital vision. After the digital vision, what's next? You want to be implementing that digital vision. So how might you go about doing that? There are different ways of doing that, but one suggestion is to start with a digital roadmap. So take all those ideas that you've gathered and prioritize them. Look at those that are going to give you the biggest bang for your buck and try and prioritize those first. Work with partners to do that, to deliver a roadmap. It's not impossible to do it by yourself, but it's certainly easier to do it with partners. And make sure that you set clear and realistic milestones to achieve those things. Not everything can be done in 3 months. And as you're implementing that digital vision, you're going to get some doubters and some naysayers. You're going to get some short-termism and some challenges. But always go back and reaffirm those objectives. Look back at the business need and then reaffirm and validate. Is that still fit for purpose? And always be clear about that communication as you're implementing it. If you've got things to celebrate, go and celebrate them. Make it a fun thing for the organization. The other thing then to look at is RFIs and RFPs. And I'm sure everybody has probably been involved in these at some point or another. But they do help you to benchmark your roadmap, your digital roadmap, to get an idea of what technologies that are out there that may be able to support it. And an RFP can also give you an idea of whether those things, whilst they may make sense to you as an organization, if they're going to cost more money than it's worth, then at least you'll know that ahead of time. So you can decide, okay, that was a good idea, but at the moment it's too expensive for us. The cost benefit is just not there. Let's move on to the next priority. So, conclusions and recommendations. As I said at the start, always challenge the status quo. Always go back to start with the organization? Have you got a clear idea of what your organization is about and what success looks like for that organization? The digital vision should be a transformation, not a migration, if you want to get the biggest benefit out of that change. Don't be a magpie when you're confronted with shiny technology. Avoid that shiny toy syndrome. Focus on the opportunities and the issues that you're trying to solve. Validate it. Will it make your boat go faster? Engage with your key stakeholders. That's where you're going to get the best ideas to take forward. Get that digital vision approved. Get it resourced, and most importantly, get it owned from the top. Create your roadmap, implement, prioritize, and set clear milestones to get on with it. Create that tangible digital vision, something that people can grasp, can see in reality, that they can get in behind and can buy into. Iterate whilst you're going through that process, and iterate when you finish that process. And just a quick loop back, right back to the start. Digital is all about data, and in this case, data is king. And the key last part is go. Start small and deliver quick, so you get that buy-in within your organization. So I think that's it for me. Back to you, Zoe. Thank you very much.